you get good at it. I was going to say I'm good at it, but anybody with my experience, my background, doing what I did, we're good at surveillance. I like to say, and it's true, I could follow my own mom around all day at the mall or wherever, and she would never know it's me. She would never know I was there. These are the kinds of things that, you get trained and experienced. But also the other part of it is, and this is true in surveillance, is you become an expert observer, okay? You become really good. Your skills become really honed at watching what does happen. Sure, there's something you'd like to happen. There's some things you don't ever want to happen. Your job when you're doing this is to not, is to just take all that out of there and watch and see what does happen.
Tonight, Walter Bosley is in the studio, and we talk about U.S. military counterintelligence. That and more, coming right up on My Alien Life. My Alien Life is recorded live from atop the Northern Rocky Mountains and is available on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, and everywhere fine podcasts are found. My website is at www.myalienlifepodcast.com. There you will find my email address, all previously recorded shows, and more. I am Cameron Brauer. This is My Alien Life, and the podcast starts right now.
My Alien Life Podcast.
Three, two, one, zero, and liftoff.
My guest tonight has been employed by the FBI, and he has been an officer of the U.S. Air Force and served as Special Agent of the Air Force Office of Special Investigation. He is currently an investigator of historical occult mysteries, the author of Pulp Fiction, and a screenwriter who has appeared on the History Channel's Ancient Aliens. Walter Bosley is here tonight. Thank you so much, sir, for being here, and welcome.
Thanks for having me here. I look forward to our talk.
Yeah, absolutely. I ran into you incidentally, not really ran into you, but I first started listening to you. It was a few years ago, but just stumbled upon you like a year ago. I was watching the documentary Mirage Men, and you have a little chunk in there, and which that's a very, very interesting movie. Maybe we can talk about that in a minute, but. You spent almost 20 years, though, in national security, which basically included the FBI and as a special agent in the Air Force in counter-espionage operations. Can you talk about your career there just for me? Because I'd like to hear about that and in what capacity that you served in each of those.
Yeah, I'll tell you, I enjoyed that part of my life very much, and I like to talk about it to the extent that I can, of course. What you're not allowed to talk about, of course, are the details. I can certainly say what I did. It was no secret that I was a special agent with the Air Force, and it was really not a secret that I was chief of a counter-espionage operations branch. And it's just the details you're not allowed to talk about. But I started in 1988, in my early 20s, with the FBI, and I went into national security in my first, by 6 or 7 months with the Bureau. I was pulled in to work on a physical surveillance team. We did discrete surveillance on known and suspected agents of the KGB and the GRU, and I worked in San Francisco at that time. And then I went to language training for about a year, 11 months actually, at the NSA Cryptological School, which was interesting because they usually, before and since, have sent people to Monterey, to what's called DLI, the Defense Language Institute. But my group went to Fort Meade. And after 11 months of Russian training, I then spent the rest of my time with the FBI as a language specialist on an operational squad, an actual undercover squad in Manhattan that had been an operation, oh my gosh, going on through a big chunk of the Cold War. And I was on that operation for the last few years of it, leading up to the time when the wall came down. And of course, the Soviet Union fell and such. And shortly after that, I earned my commission in the Air Force, went to OTS, and went immediately into the Office of Special Investigations, the Air Force OSI. And of course, I was in counterintelligence with them. My first assignment, I was what you call a liaison agent to the FBI. And interestingly enough, it was the Los Angeles office of the FBI, which was the office I started at the FBI. And so it was kind of like my FBI home, you might say. And after a couple of years, then I went to Wright-Patterson, the legendary Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, where I was chief of the CE Ops branch, which is running operations. And we would do that in, a global venue. I had a huge AOR, which in this case meant every U.S. Air Force installation and all U.S. Air Force personnel I could draw from to use as assets in my operations in a wide geographical area, but we would target them against foreign intelligence services all over the world. And I really liked that work. That was fascinating. DA Ops was just, I loved it. as you might imagine. It was, kind of it was spook work, in one facet of it. After I left the Air Force, I went into counterterrorism. Best way to describe that would be I was operational, but it was more of an operational support function, but it was operational. That sounds like it contradicts, but what I did would help counterterrorism case officers do their thing. And if that sounds perfectly vague, well, that's the nature of spook work. And
perfect,
that work
perfect counterintelligence.
Yeah, I did that all over the world. I was in a different country each time I went out for anywhere from 6 to 8 months of the year. It'd just be a different country each time, different part of the world. In that counterterrorism stuff, I did Central Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan. Of course, I went to Iraq. I went to Afghanistan multiple times. North Africa, South America, just one time in Far East Asia. And some Eastern Europe in there. So just a big, wide chunk of the world. And I love that because I do love travel. And that afforded me the opportunity to get to see some places that I wouldn't have been able to see just as a civilian tourist. Among them, the Ziggurat of Ur, which, is the famous ancient Mesopotamian pyramid that they have partially reconstructed, of course. And got to see, Nineveh with the reconstructed walls and such, and some other places, of course. And my interests, line up in that direction. So it was the perfect job for me, doing this world travel, even in places that you might consider kind of crappy. I've always found that there's something interesting to see and experience wherever you go. And I would try to take advantage of that to the degree I could. But most of my career involved, whether it was FBI, Air Force OSI, or the counterterrorism, it always involved basically tradecraft, spookcraft, spycraft. I was trained in my first year of the FBI in advanced physical surveillance. And that is something that I continued to do throughout the 18 years I was operational with this stuff, with every organization, and continued advanced training and lots of advanced experience, to the point where, as a licensed PI, that became my specialty, is just providing physical surveillance services to other PI firms that lack the experience that someone like myself has. And I enjoy it. A lot of former cops and agents don't care for surveillance. It's boring to them, but I enjoy it. I like it, and you get good at it. I was going to say I'm good at it, but anybody with my experience, my background, doing what I did, we're good at surveillance. I like to say, and it's true, I could follow my own mom around all day at the mall or wherever, and she would never know it's me. She would never know I was there. These are the kinds of things that, you get trained and experienced. But also the other part of it is, and this is true in surveillance, is you become an expert observer, okay? You become really good. Your skills become really honed at watching what does happen. Sure, there's something you'd like to happen. There's some things you don't ever want to happen. Your job when you're doing this is to not, is to just take all that out of there and watch and see what does happen. And, to be able to observe that objectively and report that clearly. And one of the interesting side product results of doing that for, a period of time and getting good at it is you do begin to develop kind of a sixth sense, a predictive edge that becomes surprisingly accurate. And a lot of it is, it's not necessarily magic. It's you get really good at watching human behavior. And of course, if you're watching the habits of a particular subject, you're going to get good at anticipating, the next move. But sometimes it does indeed feel like magic. Sometimes it feels like some remote viewing kind of thing where you just get that gut feeling that you're seeing the thing, or something, unexpected. And that really translates well when you become an investigator of the weird stuff, the extraordinary, because you have learned after years to be that objective observer. And it just really lends itself to the stuff I do now.
So let me ask you this: were you involved in relatively safe cases, or is there danger involved? Is that part of the job description?
When you're on the FBI surveillance team and you're not an agent, I was not an agent. I carried a credential. I worked undercover. In fact, after getting my training at Quantico for this particular team that I was on, the last instructions the supervisor gives you is stay away from the federal building. They don't want to see you there because you're undercover. So I would go from my home straight out to where we were working every day. I just call, and the team, I would be on the relief team, and the team would pass the target off to us wherever the target was. The target could have been up in the Marin Headlands, could have been over in Berkeley. We would just, with radio communication, and so you're working undercover, but we weren't agents, so we did not carry guns. So they did not have us working on criminal cases. Like, we didn't work gangsters or organized crime, anything like that, fugitives, anything like that. We were strictly counterintelligence. And back then, in the old days of the Cold War, counterintelligence and how it's played in the West was it's a gentleman's game. For instance, when John Walker in the early 80s was arrested and had a pistol on him because he was a licensed PI, that was rare that a guy being arrested for espionage even had a gun on him and would reach for it. That was very rare. Usually, it's a kind of a whole nerdy thing where the guy goes, "Oh my, I've been caught," and it's just you put the cuffs on him, and you might as well be going to coffee or tea or something, the way the demeanor is. So that part was not dangerous, except, of course, when you're working night shifts or graveyard shifts, which I always preferred, the night shifts. It's the peripheral things around you that might be dangerous, right? The street thug or something that might come after you. But again, you're watching spies and they tend to be, upper middle or upscale kind of folks, and they live in, nice, safe areas, so to speak. Now, when I became an agent, of course, that comes with a badge and a gun, and you're prepared for, and it's in your job description to deal with dangerous stuff if that happens. But again, I was a spy hunter and a spy runner, so that work in itself was not inherently dangerous. Now, where I experienced danger was when I started going out of the country on counterterrorism stuff. In that, I had, rifles, AK-47s shoved in my face, in the dead of night on the Dead Sheep Highway in Kuwait. I've been surrounded by, 9 Iraqis with AK-47s leveled right at me, at midnight in a back alley in Mosul. I had an old guy in Afghanistan on Chicken Street in Kabul, an older Pashtun gentleman, literally try to cut my head off with a sword. And then the job itself, that particular job would have me sometimes, in some small village somewhere where I'm really, I don't fit in. And if I got caught by the local constabulary, it'd be kind of an interesting explanation, but, I was there to try to help find an international bad guy, that kind of thing. So, it depends on what you're doing. I did, as I just laid out, I did have my share of, close calls and incidents. And of course, when you're working in war zones, there's, IEDs, there's any number of kinds of things that can happen. So, you just kind of do your job, focus on that. And, you realize that you come home alive each time, right?
In international espionage, if you're in Iraq, if you're in Afghanistan, what would you consider a spy there? Is a spy there a dime a dozen? Do they just have everybody on the payroll or whatever, and they're out trying to gather intelligence, and you're trying to figure that out?
Yeah, well, remember when I was doing the stuff overseas in Iraq and stuff, it was specifically counterterrorism. However, terrorists use a lot of spy tradecraft and stuff. And so, you've got some of the same behaviors. You've got them not wanting to be noticed. So, for example, if they're holed up in some small village because they're waiting instructions to do something, or maybe let's say this is a hypothetical. Let's say they're a bomb maker. Okay, they're holed up in a small village, waiting for their, let's say, Al-Qaeda or whatever, now it's ISIS contact, to meet with them, to give them their instructions. They want to be low-key. They don't really want to be noticed. They want to blend in. So you're going to see them doing the blending things, the things that all of us trained in tradecraft do. Even those of us who are watching for these people, we're using the tradecraft too. See, we're blending in as we're watching for the person who's trying to blend in. So both sides are using the same tradecraft, playing the same game, even though they oppose each other. It's this interesting dance of undercover people. So you have to, for example, one aspect of my job was positive identification of suspects. You have to go to some little town somewhere, some village, or maybe even a larger city, and with the minimum intel you're given, you have to find that guy. And sometimes it comes down to you and your teammates being the one saying, yes, that's him, based on some photo that may not be that great. And then you start watching and gathering, and while you're doing this, you don't want to be noticed. So it really is this dance, this ballet. It can take months in doing this to be sure. It's a process. It's a slow process. And at any given time, depending upon how you're working in a country, if the locals, on top of that, you don't want the bad guys to know you're watching them, but if the local security people, that nation's FBI or that nation's CIA or whatever, if they suspect and they bring you in because they think you're some, American working as an undercover operative in their country. Well, you can get in trouble with them. I mean, you can end up in a jail cell for an indefinite period of time.
So in a developing world or a third world, don't you stick out like a sore thumb, and aren't they targeting you like immediately or at least suspecting you?
Well, it depends. Here's the thing. If you're a good operational manager, you look at the people you have to work with, and if you got to send somebody to Afghanistan, you look at your people and you say, okay, who's going to blend better with the people in Afghanistan, or who's going to blend better in Sarajevo, right? So you select your people. If you've recruited properly, you have a good mix of people. You got, they talk about diversity. Diversity is very important for operational reasons in this work. So you pick your folks that are going to blend best. For instance, there's places in Africa, obviously, that if I was working, I would stick out. Well, then what you'd have to do is adjust with your cover, whatever your cover is. Oh, well, he's an American, businessman looking for this, that, or the other, or he's, an American, some type of businessman or, something that is hopefully non-alerting, and something that they're used to seeing Westerners. I'm 6'1" and well over 200 pounds, a big white guy from America. If they're used to seeing guys like me over there on business and commerce, then you won't stick out. Okay. But there are places where when I went to Greece, when I worked in Greece in Athens, I would have older Greek people walk up to me and initiate in Greek. They just, because the way I dressed and the way I looked, I blended. They assumed I was Greek, and they would be surprised when, it would turn out that I didn't understand what they were saying. And same thing in Bosnia, so yeah, of course, naturally I blend anywhere in Europe. I blend in South America, and such. I wouldn't blend everywhere. So you try to select the right people. You try to adjust the cover identity thing. It's a complex game.
What's the likelihood of your identity being challenged? And how do you come out of that unscathed?
It really, I never had it happen to me. And I operated for 6 years internationally. I never had it happen. Now, I'm one of the, most of us are, very calm operator. A lot of times where you might get jacked up is when you're coming back into the United States. Okay. And, the guys at the border there, I'm doing a brain dump.
Customs, immigration.
Yes, customs. Yeah. The customs officers might pull you into what's called secondary, and
right.
You still got to live your cover. But there is the chance that, you're in a foreign country and you could get pulled aside. But I never had it happen. Never. I went to Israel twice, and they're very good at what they do. They're customs and immigration folks, and you feel it. They don't browbeat you, but you're being looked at, and they're thinking. And I smooth both times going into that country. I never had an issue. So I guess you could call that, luck, but it never happened. It never happened to anyone I was working with.
One of the other questions I would have is when you're in a country and you've assumed another identity, I mean, how important is it to ask the right questions? For example, if you're in Africa and your alternative identity or your cover is you're a diamond exporter, and you start asking questions that don't have anything to do with diamonds. You're trying to get intel and things like that.
Right.
How do you blend the two to get the result that you need by asking the correct questions without giving up your cover?
Well, here's the thing. First of all, you need to know your cover. You need to study your cover and know it. you are part of creating your own cover when you're operational the way I was. Okay, you come up with your own identity, that identity's background, the whole thing. And of course, it has to be logical and make sense. And you come up with multiple ones. In my career, the whole 18 years, I think I had 7 different identities, and I used 5 of them. 5 of them. There were 2 that were just on file that I never got around to using. Now, here's the thing. In what I did, I wasn't out there collecting intelligence in that way. I was out there watching people, watching particular people. And so in what I did, I never had to worry about the scenario you described. The interaction that I would have with locals was, at the coffee shop or at the restaurant or at the hotel. Never had to, worry about the scenario that, because what you're talking about was more like if you're being a general intelligence officer, out there collecting. Now, the type of cover you're going to have as an IO is going to be different than the type of cover I had. Okay. Because the IO is not exactly undercover, not exactly under any kind of like deep cover. Okay. Depending upon most of them, they're suspected of being intelligence officers anyway, because the way this works is intelligence officers are generally attached to their nation's embassy. And everybody plays that game, and everybody knows that game. Everybody knows it. And it's beneficial in the job as an IO to be suspected to be an IO, because sometimes good things will come to you, right? Someone might come to you and say, I have great info for you. Oh, gee, I guess I would be interested in that. So things can come to you. Now, the capacity that I worked, we were not supposed to be suspected of being what we were. So
I think that's a good point that, you should expect information voluntarily to come your way. But that again, I mean, wouldn't that be the ultimate test? Somebody comes to you with some juicy bits of information that could be false and say, hey, I have this information, and they're trying to set you up.
Well, that's exactly what I did when I was in Ohio for 3 years. It's called a provocation, and that's basically the stock and trade of running double agent operations. You're running a double agent is you're running a guy against a foreign intelligence service who goes into that foreign intelligence service and says, hey, I got something for you. You might be interested. I'll sell it to you. Either I really need the money, or I'm pissed off at my country, or whatever. And, of course, if you're putting your guy up to that, he's faking it to them, right? Well, if the target happens to be, say, the GRU, the Russian military intelligence, they're going to suspect, okay, is this that damn Bosley in the Air Force up at Wright-Patterson sending me a provocation? And this dance will be played. Now, how you generally know if they're buying your guy is real is if comes the time where they say, hey, the next time you come see us, we're not going to meet here at the embassy, in Lima. We're going to have you meet us in a park somewhere, up in Bogota. See? Because that's a sign that they're beginning to go, oh, wait, maybe this guy is real. Maybe he's not a double agent. Okay. And that's the kind of thing, if you're running the double agent, that you want to happen. But it all depends on, what you're doing. It determines your perspective on the game. So yeah, if a guy comes up to you and says, I have information, because he has good reason to suspect you are what you are, an intelligence officer, yeah, you do have to consider, okay, is this a provocation? Is this a fake? Is this a double?
What kind of mind do you have to do this? It seems you have to have some very, very deep intuition, and a lot of people don't have that, right?
That certainly serves the ability to do it well and to, have any lengthy time in the work. A lot of people, several people go into this and they don't stay very long because it's just not their cup of tea, or, they lack, certain abilities, certain perspectives and sensibilities to be effective in the work. And they are pretty good at knowing who to recruit. I mean, they've gotten real good at that. This is also why you find kind of what you call legacy recruiting. Family members recruit other family members because, for instance, I was brought into this, really encouraged to do this and brought into this by an uncle, one of my mom's brothers, who had been, by the time he retired, he'd been in the intelligence community for 44 years. And he was the one that started working on me and convinced me to go apply to the FBI. And he had been, of course, seeing me my entire life, had been able to watch me closely and stuff. So a lot of times they do, people will recruit from their own families for that reason, because they're able to observe. They're able to tell, you know what, this kid has these special little perspectives, this one not so much, and they can pick and choose.
Can people develop that type of intuition that you would need out there in the field, or at least can they enhance what they already have?
Yes, I've always been a believer of, in people, with enough training, with enough experience. Of course, they can enhance what they have already, and of course, they can learn some of the tricks and get, even if they're not really great on the intuition, they can become really good with surveillance skills. If you're good with just simply the surveillance skills, you can be really good at the job and enjoy it, because it really is. It's, as the movie says, it's a particular set of skills, and just like muscle memory and such, you just keep practicing those, you're going to get better. It's the art of subtlety. It's the art of staying calm, as you do it.
What are the tools of the trade? What's the minimum spy gear that you would absolutely find essential to have with you?
You might be surprised. There's a lot of, for instance, PI firms out there that pride themselves on all their gadgets. Now, gadgets can be useful in particular situations, but in my specialty, what I and others like me, I'm not singling myself out, other people with my same level of experience, what we're experts at doesn't require any gadgets at all. The only thing we'll use is a camera, and we become experts in using the camera without you knowing we're using it. Now, nowadays, that's a lot easier to do with all these GoPros and tiny cameras, right? But here's the thing. In what we did, particularly when you're working in a foreign country, you don't want spy gadgets and tech on you, because that's going to get you jacked up in that jail cell. That's going to make local security realize, hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? So we were trained, and we were told not to use spy gear. We were trained to how to do our jobs without it. And so I don't, other than a camera, I don't use anything. I don't use any little gear.
I have a friend that worked for the LAPD in narcotics for 30 years. Mm-hmm. And he stayed a very professional investigator that whole time. He basically, bought drugs and lived that life along these drug addicts and drug dealers for a very long time, and was in Mexico. How do you maintain that sort of lifestyle for 30 years, maybe as an investigator, maybe as a spy, and then come out of it on the other side 100% mentally sound? I mean, to me, that would be really tough to keep that, to keep physically and mentally fit.
Well, what your friend did was something different than what I did. When I was on the team with the FBI, for instance, I would go home, Walter Bosley every night. Now, on the job, I had a different identity. If I had to show something, if I had to use a credit card, or if I had to show my driver's license, that had a different identity. But my FBI credential was on my person, and it had my real identity. And Walter Bosley would go home every night. Now, likewise, when I was in New York on the language specialist Russian translator team, I would listen to FISA wiretap conversations of GRU and KGB spies. But each day I would go to where the squad, the classified, the undercover squad was located in Manhattan, and I would have an identity that I would use associated with me being in that building. But I would go home every night. Walter Bosley would go home every night, okay, and on weekends. Now, when I was doing the same thing when I was an agent with the Air Force, working out of Ohio, I was, of course, I was an agent, so it was less. I had a means of protecting myself, whatever. But remember, I was following spies. I was running double agents and stuff like that, and I was working domestically. So again, I was me unless I was doing a particular thing, which I would use a name for. Now, in counterterrorism, I would go away for about 3 or 4 weeks at a time in some foreign country, and yeah, I would live my cover. I'd do that, but then I would come home at the end of those 3 or 4 weeks, see, and be home for a couple of weeks. So I was never out there for months and months and months and months, endlessly. And even when I deployed to Saudi Arabia and Kuwait with OSI before that, I was still me, Walter Bosley, unless, some specific little incident required me to be something else. So it's different than, the scenario of the deep undercover cop, right? It is, it's only 3 or 4 weeks at a time. Now, during those 3 or 4 weeks, yeah, you got to do it. You got to do it right. For instance, we weren't allowed to use our hotel room phones to call home because that's who we really are, right? And when you're in foreign countries, in most situations, those hotel room phones are tapped by the local security, okay, or local police. So I would get a phone card, that they used to have. I don't know if they still have them in the other countries, and go down the street or across town and use like this 5-minute phone card, and I'd get to talk to my son a couple of times a week for like 2 or 3 minutes at a time. But I would have to do it from a payphone away from my hotel in case someone was watching me. And when I would go away, I'd arrange for a family member to take care of any unexpected things that would come up with bills or whatever. I'd have someone watch my dog for me while I was gone. But for that period of that month. Now, here's where temperament comes in. I just happen to be the kind of person who can be away from loved ones for extended periods of time, and I don't lose sleep over it when I'm doing that job. Now, remember, I was in a job, and that job was important. And so when you're in that frame of mind, you can do that kind of thing. You still got to have the right temperament. There were people who would go into the job, and after 1 or 2 trips, they just couldn't do it. They would quit because they just had to be. And this is no slight on them. It's just people are different. But they, emotionally, psycho-emotionally, they just needed to be more attached to their real selves, their real home. They couldn't go a month at a time. Whereas I could. And a lot of us, most of us who do the job, that's just the way we were. We could deal with it. Now, after, as you point out, what's the most difficult aspect of it wasn't so much adjusting and keeping stories straight and everything, because nobody in my personal life knows any of my undercover identities. I don't worry so much about that. The thing I noticed was adjustment to the civilian, what I call the civilian life. When I wasn't doing that work anymore, and I was here in this real world, Monday through Friday, week after week, there was no going away for a month, 6 times a year. And, I realized this is nutty. The real world, so to speak, is crazier than the world I was living in.
It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it can be nutty. So that's kind of an adjustment. But I'm not an adrenaline junkie. I do love operational work, and I really enjoyed it. But I'll tell you, I had no trouble sleeping, no matter where I was, even in war zones. I could deal with it. I can handle it. And most people who do that work, they can. It's just really, if you're cut out for it emotionally, you can do it for, a career.
You corner someone that you have intelligence on, and that puts that subject in basically hot water. Is it likely that you can get him to operate as a double agent?
That's, one of the textbook situations that if you're working in the capacity, to where you need to do that. Yeah. And that's, now a similar situation like, when I was an agent, for example, with the Air Force, if you had a guy and you're going for a bigger charge on him, or you're looking to get, catch a bigger fish, and you've seen this in the movies and TV, it's the way it is in real life. And you can squeeze a guy with a lesser charge. Okay. Yeah, you would do that. You'd squeeze him to get him to give you access to the bigger fish that you want. It's very similar in the, in the spy world. If you got something that you can squeeze a guy on, and you can use that to get him to do your bidding. Well, yeah, of course. Now that's in a scenario when I say do your bidding, that's when you're using, essentially what are people in the bad guys world. Okay. Now, when you're running double agents, you're using what are the good guys, and they can always tell you no. There's no squeezing them to be a double agent. If you vet them for a long time, you can vet them for a year or more, and they just think you're the buddy of some agent that they know, and you're playing golf and going to baseball games, and then comes the day, where you buddy up with them a little more, and then comes the day when you pitch them. And you say, hey, this is what I really do, and this is what I think you could do for us. And if you're willing, that would be great. If not, that's cool too. So it's two different forms of, one is a little bit more like coercion, because you're squeezing somebody who's a knucklehead to begin with, okay, and they're useful. The other one is, your skills of, convincing somebody, but you can't, you don't have that part where you can really squeeze them because they're a good person. You've got nothing on them to squeeze them, and it's all voluntary. So you kind of appeal to their sense of, values and patriotism, so to speak, and such. There are little switches that you can flip, and those work. One guy, when I was able to get him to personalize national security in this instance, when I had a guy that I needed him to help me out with something, a source, I was able to get him to think it more in terms of, he's doing something that ultimately will protect his kids. Okay. And that's when the light went on. That was the thing that made him go, yeah, I'll do this. And, so.
I was recently at the International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. And what's really neat about that is there's a lot of stories there about spies in Washington. How prevalent do you think spies are now in the Capitol?
They've always been, and they always will be. There's loads of them there. They're going to be in any nation's capital. You're going to have, if any nation can get their spies in there, they're going to be there. We do the same thing. We have our people in Moscow. We have our people, here, there, and everywhere. So yeah, there's a ton of them there. They're going to be in New York, of course, because the UN is there, for example, and other things go on, in New York. We had a pretty good number of spies in Ohio at Wright-Patterson. Why? Because Wright-Patterson is where all the Air Force advanced tech labs are, right? If the U.S. Air Force is developing some new high tech, military tech, it's going to start right there at Wright-Patterson. So, of course, you're going to have foreign nations, friend and foe, send their intelligence collection experts there, their intelligence officers.
Well, I would think likewise, too, like in Montana, right where I live, and I'm surrounded by nuclear missile silos. You'd think that they're, there's got to be some there that, intelligence is simple as mapping new construction and things like that. Because in Montana, it's not like North Korea. I mean, they do this stuff with these nuclear missiles right out in the open. I mean, there's no attempt to even hide it. And so is that important? I mean, is stuff like that important? And why aren't we trying to hide things as simple as, it's not simple, but things like that, like our location of missile silos? Is it important? Is it important that we let Russia know that we've got them there and they can look at them anytime they want? I don't get that.
Well, all they're able to look at is what they're able to look at, is what they're able to see. We always have the things they can't see.
Right.
So there's always that game of, oh yeah, look over here, look at that right there. Of course, somewhere else we've got the better thing. So, sometimes, yes, you want them to see the thing. You're kind of,
right.
Yeah, take a look at this over here. For that reason.
And we have, Area 51, and we have Wright-Patterson, like you mentioned. I mean, they're visible from satellites, and to me, I would think that we let them see what we want them to see, because otherwise, we would have come up with a method of getting or removing satellites, above us very easily. But maybe I'm wrong about that.
And we could still have that, but you don't want to play that card till it's time.
Right. I've listened to several former intelligence officers. They've told me their stories, and I've had some on the show. Without exceptions, the stories are absolutely astounding, just like yours is tonight. The information they gave me, though, seemed limitless. So after duty with national security, who determines what you can talk about and why?
It's pretty simple, actually. They tell you up front. That, for instance, I've spoken in generality, but I've not been specific. Like, I cannot tell you the names of the people that were actually double agents for me. I can't tell you the actual target nation cities that they went to, where the targets were. I can't tell you specifics of, espionage cases I investigated or worked on. The specifics I can't tell you. You can speak in generalities. And it's really just common sense. Operational security, they say, asset safety, operational security is paramount. That's always, always, always the most important thing, because you don't have an operation. You've got nothing if you don't have operational security. And that is why there's all the tradecraft. That is why we can't talk details. The things that I've been sharing with you are things actually, all sides know this stuff. All sides know how spies operate. And the beauty of it is, even though we know all this stuff, it still works, because, this stuff allows you to blend in with millions of people, see? And it's really simple. It's just really a lot of common sense for all its murky spookiness and cloak and dagger sense. It really is just pretty much common sense in
Well, you have intelligence, and you have counterintelligence, and you have people out there like Rick Doty, who, wow, I mean, some of the things that he talks about, you would think are things that he shouldn't be talking about, but he does.
Right, and okay.
But there could be a reason for that.
Exactly. Okay, now Doty and I worked for the same organization. He was not on the scene when I started. I heard about him before I ever heard about him publicly. I heard about him. He was mentioned to me as a cautionary tale, because I was working in some counterintelligence stuff, and they said, be careful with this. There was this guy, Doty, blah, blah, blah. Okay? And here's the thing. I've been an OSI agent like he was. We even, for a while, the specialty he had is the one I had. And so I know that job too. And there are things that he says that people have to realize that's not coming from OSI. And, you just have to decide for yourself where that's coming from, why he's saying those things. Now, is he playing to the UFO community, or is he still operational to some degree, playing a perception management game? Okay. But you can't take what he says about this stuff at face value. Okay. I don't know. I don't know the man personally. I've had one personal conversation with him, and that was on the computer. That was all typed out a couple of years ago. That's the only personal interaction I've ever had with the man. So you got to take what he says with a grain of salt.
I love his story, though. I love everything that he says. I mean, it's totally amazing. Everything is in its place. You can't trip him up.
Right.
You know?
Oh, the guy, you know, he's good at, you know, what he's doing, what he does, I think.
He's the best.
That said, he gets demonized by a lot of people for the
Right.
Benowitz affair.
Sure.
It is my opinion, and I'm good friends with Greg Bishop, who wrote the book, Project Beta, and really dug into this. You know, my opinion of what happened to Benowitz was not ultimately at the hand of Rick Doty. I know that
I don't believe it was either.
To me, the culprit is the NSA. I've looked at that. I've read Greg's book. Ultimately, I came away with the opinion that it was the NSA that was pushing, that was doing the stuff that was really driving Benowitz over the edge. I unfortunately, you know, Doty got started in it, and you know, he's kind of the guy that's going to take the hit because he's the face of it. But ultimately, my opinion, because none of us, not even I, who used to be in the organization, have seen the case file on that the OSI Benowitz operation. Okay, we don't know the details that are in there. For all we know, there's particular, well, things can be said and communicated, okay, in a report that express the organization's displeasure with some of the things that went on. And I wouldn't be surprised if I were to see that OSI file on that whole thing, and I were to see that, you know, somebody up at the command level and on down to Doty, you know, was saying, you know, this is BS. We don't want any part of this, or, you know, this, that, or the other, expressing their displeasure with what I think the NSA was doing, ultimately, the NSA.
I think he you know, our government is got every bit of money that has gone Doty's way. They've gotten their money's worth there. I mean, it's something there for a lifetime. So, what do you think about counterintelligence, and how deep does that go? Because, you know, Rick and I were talking about, there's layers and there's layers upon layers. Sure. And I mean, you start looking at it that way and there's no end to it. So what about guys like Bob Lazar and David Adair, who said he worked at Area 51? Why not that as counterintelligence? I mean, why hasn't somebody said, you know, these guys are just counterintelligence officers that are, you know?
Yeah, they could totally be counterintelligence assets or operatives being used to put this information out there to assist in perception management. Okay. They could be that. Now, setting that aside, I find Lazar, he has no credibility to me. I don't think his job at Los Alamos was, you know, the big deal that people extrapolated it out to be. To me, Lazar is a lot of nothing. And, you know, that's a whole other conversation. But, Lazar has, this whole thing that Lazar says with the reverse engineering and the stuff he was, you know, the classic Lazar thing, I don't buy it. And I don't buy that he's just the aw shucks, I don't really want the attention, you know, baloney. He wouldn't let himself be the star of this documentary. He wouldn't make the personal appearances with it. You know, I was there in LA when they did the screening, and there he was. Aw shucks, I don't really want the attention. I don't buy it. So Lazar has no credibility. Now, I haven't looked at Adair as closely, so I don't really have an opinion or a perspective on him yet.
He, I believe that his story, I mean, literally he could sit down with you and I, and we would drop dead before his story was over. I mean, it goes on forever, and it's incredible. And it's the same, you know, it's just, it's tight. It's accurate. It's detailed. There's conversations, there's birthdays, there's what they ate that day. And, you know, over and over again, it's repetitious. It never changes. It's the most incredible thing that I have ever heard. And I've heard a lot of things, and where does that come from? I mean, if it's not real, you know, obviously there's somebody that has an incredible mind in a very strange place.
look at it from the perspective of someone from my background. Okay, when you have to, as I said before, you're part of creating your own cover identity. You're the one who has to come up with what's called the story about who you are that you have to tell if you're confronted. The story that you have to live. That we call that your cover legend. Okay, with a small L, your legend. Okay, you develop that thing to the extent that you're going to need, depending upon what you're doing. Okay, and you get to know that legend, that story, so well that it's possible if you had schizophrenia somewhere in the genetics, you might begin to be someone who believes the story you create. It has to be down. Why? Because if you're pulled into that interrogation room and they're about to rubber hose you, okay, or put the battery clamps, on you, you really need to be convincing. You really need to get that story down. It had better match every time you tell it. There's your repetition. Okay? Now, what I'm saying here, I understand people say, well, wait a minute, Walter, then how do we know you're telling us the truth with any of your stuff? Well, that's why, look at the things I researched. That's why there's footnotes in my books and stuff. Okay? But they're right. As far as stuff I tell about my personal background in my personal life, that they really, if they're just hearing it, they don't know that it's not just a cover legend that I've made up that I'm telling. And that's kind of that's the downside when, you reveal that, hey, that's what some of these guys could be doing. The fact that I would even say that, I'd be kind of shooting myself in the foot, but you have to always, when these people come out and say, I worked here, I did this was the amazing thing going on, you have to kind of curb the excitement a little bit. You got to stand back and you got to always keep that critical thinking in place. And if you really think, well, this is it, this is the guy, do your own research, do your own background research, look into a little bit, ask for documentation. One of the things I do, for instance, you send me your email, or I think we've already communicated email or direct message or whatever. I'm going to send you a copy of my DD-214 because that's what I do. If I go on a show and I'm, that host has said this guy was OSI, blah, 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 okay, and I'm saying this, I'm going to let you see my DD-214, okay, which shows that's what I was. Now, you as somebody in the media, as a host, you have every right to ask someone like me or some of these other guys claim they were in the military or whatever, do you have anything to prove that? Any documentation? Because unfortunately, we have had guys faking it, and we have had trouble with, the government playing games in our community. So you guys have every right to ask for that, and I recommend it. I volunteer my documentation. So that's something that you could, ask for. And you look at their reaction. You see what excuse they come up with for not having that, or you watch them stammer and stutter, or if they get angry, that's a good one too.
You were in Mirageman. How did you get in that?
Greg Bishop was acquainted with, I guess it's Mark and John, the guys who made that film. And he told them about my background, and they asked if they could interview me in it. And they interviewed me in Redlands and, asked me questions, and I gave them, the honest answers, and that was that. Now, some of the things in the book are different than what was said. That's another issue. So that's how I ended up in that film.
Well, they must have thought something of you to actually put you in there. It's a good movie. And
I wouldn't say you got to understand the perspective they're coming from. I learned later is they're not terribly fond of the U.S. National security community. Okay.
Right.
Yes, they loved Kit Green, but of course everybody loves Kit Green these days. It's like schoolgirl crushes these people have. but anyone else was kind of spun with, derision or some type of, if you look closely and if you know something about their background, it really was not meant to be flattering to any of us.
We've talked almost an hour now about counterintelligence, which I love. Wow. So would you get back into it?
Oh yeah,
for the right job.
This way. Oh yeah, if they came and said, "Hey, Walter, we need you," first of all, ain't that an ego boost? Your country comes
that would be amazing. Hey, if they asked me, that would be great.
Yeah, if when you've been in it long enough, it's like, oh, I guess no one else is expendable. Okay, so here's this cynical humor that wow, you're scraping the bottom of the barrel if you're coming back to get me. But yeah, absolutely. Any one of us that have done it, anybody who's doing it, if they could tell you, it was the coolest work I've ever done in my life. I still use these skills as a licensed PI. I use these skills as a researcher. There's certain skills, that this totally resonates with being a researcher and investigator into this weird stuff. So the skills remain honed. Once you've done it long enough, you get good at it. It's literally like riding a bicycle. You never forget it. You fall right back into it, and it is a kick. I love it. I love the whole thing. And yeah, I would do it if they needed me. I'd do it.
Anything that you can tell us about that you didn't like about it?
Only some of the people you encounter, and isn't that the way it is with anything? Occasionally you'll get into a unit where there's a clique, and I personally despise cliquism. I don't like that.
Right there with you.
When you're working as a team and you got to watch each other's backs, and your safety, security, your very lives depend upon that, you don't need, this little special clique over here, of friends. And particularly if the clique are, dishonest or backstabbers, that kind of thing. I've encountered that. So really the absolute only thing that I did not like about it were just some of the people I encountered. Because the other people, the majority of the people I work with, were some of the greatest people I've ever met, and I'd work with them again, anywhere, anytime. So that's really, the only thing. Being away, dangerous situations, I'd do it all again. But, some people I would say, not with that guy. Or if you had to work with that guy, you'd set him in his place from day one. And I've had to do that, let somebody know where they stood with me and it wasn't good. But I've been a little too public for them to ask me that. I think, it'd be a little harder for me to work in that capacity. Now it doesn't mean they couldn't use you under your real identity. I'm not going to pretend, that they couldn't do that, because they certainly could if your real identity and situation was useful. But,
Did they have deep pockets? Did you have an unlimited expense account, or how did the money flow work? I mean, obviously you're going to have needs out there on the road, right, Walter?
One of the things they trust you with, okay, guns and fun, as we say, okay. You're given an envelope of cash, and you're responsible for that cash, and that cash is primarily for emergencies. And when you come back from a trip, it's accounted for down to the penny. You got to spend a little bit of it to maybe get through a toll here or a little expense there. If the guy goes into the cafe, you got to go in, and follow him. You got to buy coffee or something. But for the most part, you're given a nice, good chunk of money, cash. And, if something goes bad in the country you're in, that's how you walk up to a cabbie and say, here's 5,000 US, I'm buying your car. And, they won't turn it down, because 5,000 US, they'd be the big man on campus at home, for that, and then you're speeding like a demon to get to the nearest safe border. What comes to mind is Jordan. It's like, get to Israel as fast as you can, because that's friendly, but Jordan's a friendly place too, but it's always a just in case kind of thing. But yeah, you're given, they do have deep pockets, but you always, the ethic in that culture is That's not your money, right? It's their money. It's the taxpayers' money ultimately, but it's not your money. And the best way to get in trouble and get booted out is to play games with that money. And there were people that would happen to. They wouldn't listen, and they thought they were smart, and they would use that money for personal reasons. And then they would end up, lying about it. Oh, I was mugged. Oh, I lost it. And, they got their ways of finding out when that's not true. And so, you just got to look at it that way. Money and material resources, they're not yours. They're tools. They're tools for the job. And guns. You don't mess around with the guns. If you got to carry a gun, you follow your training, you use a level head, the guy with the sword, fortunately, I did not have to shoot him. The way that worked out, he was subdued. I didn't have to shoot anybody. But I was prepared to. I mean, I cleared the holster. I was ready to go, ready to rock and roll. But, it's a job of, it's a lot of fun. It's really cool, right? It's cool. I mean, it's cool to be able to say, hey, this is what I did, but it's a lot of responsibility too. You have to be a responsible, adult. You have to be reliable, dependable, and trustworthy.
Very cool. Very interesting stuff. What do you got going on right now, Walter, that you want to let our listeners know about?
Well, I'm working on my 11th nonfiction book.
Right on.
And that will be followed by the follow-up to my latest book, The Esoteric Napoleon, which is really turning out to be a big hit for me. People are finding that to be interesting. So I'm always working on a book. I have a couple of media projects that are developing. I don't like to announce things until they really happen, right? It's more fun that way. Just always looking at stuff.
I'm going to read Latitude 33 in a couple of weeks. To me, that sounds like a really, really good read. We talked actually before we went on air, and me driving to Disneyland. I absolutely love Disneyland.
Well, have mercy on me. That was my first.
No, I love the premise of the book. So yeah,
when I look at that, I go, ouch.
Well, of course you do.
Was my first one. So it's that way. But my books, I started my own publishing label, 17 years ago. And so I publish all my books print on demand. They can only be found at lulu.com, LULU.com. And, I really, I enjoy being a publisher as much as I do being a writer.
And you also publish for some other people. I had heard you talk earlier. And so that's interesting to me too. It's got to be interesting for you to meet other authors and look at their work and discuss their work.
I've become good friends with a couple of them. One of them, Seshari, who has since retired from writing. He and I became very good friends and close research associates, and he was very instrumental in my Empire of the Wheel investigation, and pretty much everything since then. You meet interesting people. I don't publish others so much anymore. That was mostly fiction authors. It's my books pretty much keep the catalog full right now, but you never know. I mean, if somebody comes along and I really like what they're doing and they got no other options, I might take them on. But I'm probably the most honest publisher you'll ever meet. I tell authors, look, in 2019, in our times, it's just as easy for you to start your own label, be your own publisher, and then you don't have to split your royalties with anyone, and you control exactly how your books are edited and how they look. And, I always encourage authors to, go the independent self route, because it's not like it used to be. It used to be something people, didn't respect. It was vanity press stuff, but times have changed. The technology has allowed, self-publishing to be something much, much better and more respectable than just the old vanity press.
What about your exploration of the unknown? I know for a while that you spent some time with David Hatcher Childress, and how did that come about, and what was that like?
Well, I was a fan of his I'd read a few of his books in the 90s, mid to late 90s. And in 2002, I learned that, he kind of leads tours of interesting places. So he was leading one of his Mexico tours, the Mayan ruins through central Mexico. And I called Adventures Unlimited Press, and David answered the phone. And that was the first time I, encountered him. And I went on this Mexico trip. David is a great guy. He's very personable. When you go on one of his trips, it's all inclusive. Nobody feels excluded. He's there. He's part of it. You have dinner with him. You hang out with him, and he's very knowledgeable of, the things, the places and the lore and the stories about the places you're seeing. I liked it so much that first trip. I went on the second one that, he offered later that same year. And then the following year, I did the South America trip. And yeah, I've known David since 2002. And he's just a really nice guy. And I highly recommend, going on his trips to anyone interested in, visiting the ruins. And if they've seen him on TV and they've read any of his books.
Would love that. Of course, you have your book. All your books are available on Amazon, or most of them. Shimmering Light and
Lulu.com, not Amazon.
So you want to go to Lulu.com. Where's your? Where else can they find you online other than Facebook?
Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at the Walter Bosley channel. Every Sunday night, I'm very informal, and I pick a topic, and I'll do kind of a little report or chat talk about that topic, and people are really enjoying that. They like the real casual approach. But only a couple of my titles are on Amazon Kindle anymore. I've pulled out of Amazon because Amazon is not good for small press publishers or independent authors anymore. So I'm all print on demand, and all at Lulu.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Walter Bosley, for joining the show tonight. And if you wouldn't mind, sir, before you go, I'd like you to give our listeners the final word.
The final word.
The final word. You're on the spot.
Well, you know what? Just remain curious. Use critical thinking. And have fun with this stuff. It can be serious stuff, all this weird, UFOs, paranormal, strange mysteries and stuff. But as serious as it can be, always remember to have fun with it.
And look into Walter Bosley and read his books. Walter Bosley, thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed talking to you.
My Alien Life Podcast.
You can find my website at www.myalienlifepodcast.com, and please subscribe to my latest downloads at iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and at podbean.com. And please follow me and like me on Facebook and Twitter. My Alien Life is written and produced for broadcast at Studio 254 in the Northern Rocky Mountains. The music you are hearing is produced and created by ELEON. You can find all ELEON's work online at Heart Dance Records.